You weren't dangerous. At least, that's what they thought. Just another passenger. Just another face in the endless shuffle of travelers. That's what the officer whispered under his breath when they stopped you. She looks harmless. But harmless didn't set off federal alerts. Harmless didn't make secure phones start ringing in rooms without windows. And harmless didn't carry the kind of clearance that made four-star generals leave their desks without warning. And if you believe respect should never expire, hit like and subscribe right now. Because what happened to Lena Walsh inside that airport terminal is something you'll remember long after this story ends. It was 5:42 a.m. when Lena walked into Reagan International, pulled low, her black duffel bag slung over one shoulder. The terminal smelled faintly of burnt coffee and early morning exhaustion, the kind of place where thousands of people passed unnoticed every single day. Except her. At first, there was nothing unusual, just the hum of fluorescent lights, the robotic voice announcing boarding groups, and the rhythmic shuffle of impatient feet. Lena moved with purpose, her pace steady but unhurried, eyes fixed straight ahead as though she'd walked these halls 1,000 times. But the red light on the scanner wasn't expecting her. It happened the moment she slid her boarding pass across the kiosk. A shrill beep echoed louder than it should have, drawing a few curious stares from nearby travelers. On the security monitor, a single line of red text flashed. Security flag, Class Delta. Sergeant Ethan Miller, a mid-level TSA officer with more pride than patience, frowned at the screen. "Ma'am," he said, trying to sound casual, "I'm going to need you to step over here for a secondary check." Lena paused, her gaze steady but calm. She didn't argue, didn't question, just nodded once and followed him toward the inspection lane where two other officers were waiting. People in line craned their necks to watch. Someone whispered, "Must be a watch list hit." Phones came out. Miller scanned her ID, then frowned deeper. This can't be right," he muttered, glancing back at the terminal. "Your credentials, these were issued by the Department of Defense, but the system says they expired 11 years ago." Lena said nothing. "Ma'am, do you understand what I'm telling you?" Miller pressed. "You're trying to pass security on credentials that don't exist anymore." Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but sharp. "That's because the clearance level above yours doesn't expire." The words hung there for a moment, strange and weighty, but Miller dismissed them instantly, waving over another officer. "Search your bag," he ordered. The duffel slid across the steel counter, its zipper tugged open. Inside were only a few folded clothes and one sealed black envelope, its surface stamped with a small, embossed insignia that made the junior officer hesitate before touching it. A circle, two wings, a sword through the center. Miller noticed. "What's that?" "Classified," Lena replied calmly. Miller chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Lady, you're at an airport security checkpoint. Nothing is classified here." Lena's gaze didn't shift. "If you open that without authorization, someone's going to call you before you finish breathing." The silence that followed was heavy, awkward. Miller stared at her like she'd just threatened him, then snatched the envelope anyway, tearing at the seal. Inside nothing. At least, nothing anyone there understood. A small, square panel of steel, no bigger than a credit card, was embedded with a thin microchip and an etched pentagon crest so subtle it caught only under certain light. Miller turned it over, confused. What is this?" Lena folded her arms, unbothered. "You don't have clearance to know." That was the first moment Miller hesitated, but ego is louder than instinct. He waved over another officer. "We've got a potential security breach here. Get her detained for questioning." A few nearby travelers gasped softly. Phones tilted higher, recording everything now. Lena's jaw stayed relaxed, her breathing even, like someone who'd already seen this exact moment play out before. That only made Miller angrier. He leaned in close, his voice low but sharp. "You think you're special because you've got an old badge and a fancy chip? Ma'am, nobody's above federal security protocol." She tilted her head, her expression calm, almost pitying. "I'm not above it," she said softly. "I helped write it." For the first time, one of the younger officers faltered. "Sarge," he whispered, shifting uncomfortably. "Her ID number. It's tagged with something I've never seen before. I scanned it through clearance. It bounced straight to a closed server. No terminal, no override." Miller ignored him, calling for his supervisor. He wasn't letting go, not yet. While they waited, Lena stood completely still, hands folded neatly in front of her, watching the rising tension ripple through the checkpoint. More travelers slowed their pace, whispering, drawn to the quiet, suffocating standoff. Then something unexpected happened. The secure line at the TSA desk rang. Not Miller's desk phone. Not the local supervisor's office. The red line. The officers froze. That line had rung maybe 3 times in 5 years. Baines, the senior shift officer, picked up. "This is Sergeant Baines." The voice on the other end was calm, cold, and clipped. "Do not detain Ms. Lena Walsh. This order comes directly from the Office of Special Operations. Treat her with full clearance access." Baines straightened instantly, his free hand trembling slightly as he pressed the call to speaker. "Sir," she triggered a Class Delta alert on. The voice interrupted, sharper now. "I don't care what your screen says. She outranks every one of you in that building combined. You do not touch her. Do you understand me?" The entire room went silent. Miller's throat worked, but no words came out. He turned to Lena, his jaw tight, his pride fighting his fear. This doesn't make sense," he muttered finally. Lena smiled faintly, almost sad. "It's not supposed to." Before anyone could ask another question, 2 security officers arrived from an upper-level corridor. Their suits were pressed, their lapel pins subtle but unmistakable. They didn't introduce themselves, didn't flash badges. They didn't need to. One of them simply nodded at Lena. "Ma'am, your escort's ready." She picked up her duffel, glanced briefly at Miller, and spoke softly. "You should be careful what doors you try to open. Some of them were never meant for you." And just like that, she walked past the stunned officers, through a secure gate no traveler had ever seen before. But Miller couldn't shake it. He couldn't let it go. He watched her disappear behind the reinforced doors, and all he could think about was the black envelope, the embedded chip, and the phone call that shouldn't have existed. Something about her didn't fit. Something big. Something buried so deep, even the systems designed to protect against it couldn't see her coming. And that's when whispers began to spread. Among the travelers, among the officers, and eventually across federal channels. Who exactly was Lena Walsh? Because harmless people don't have secure phone overrides. Harmless people don't carry microchips engraved with Pentagon insignias. And harmless people don't make generals move without notice. And this was only the beginning. The cameras were still rolling. Phones still raised. But Lena Walsh had vanished behind the reinforced security doors, leaving a quiet kind of chaos in her wake. Travelers murmured among themselves, trying to piece together what they'd just witnessed. A woman detained like a criminal, then released without question, escorted through a corridor no one even knew existed. Back at the checkpoint, Sergeant Ethan Miller stood frozen, jaw clenched, anger boiling beneath the humiliation. He hated the way she looked at him. Calm, like she knew something he didn't, like his authority had always been an illusion. And yet, something about it didn't make sense. The clearance, the envelope, the call. "Class Delta," Miller muttered under his breath, staring at the frozen security monitor. That's top-level encryption. Why would she trigger something like that? Sergeant Baines was on his headset now, murmuring into a secure channel. His usual bark softened into careful precision. A few officers exchanged worried looks, whispering beneath their breath. None of them had seen anything like this before. But then, 32 minutes later, the whispers stopped. Because the black SUVs arrived. 3 of them, unmarked, rolling silently up to the curb outside the terminal. The first to step out was a tall man in a dark suit, sunglasses perched low, the kind of posture that screamed federal, though his lapel pin bore no agency name. Behind him came 2 more, one carrying a sealed briefcase, the other scanning the terminal like he was mapping vulnerabilities only he could see. And then the last door opened. General Marcus Devereaux, for silver stars on his shoulders, the kind of presence that made rooms straighten even before they understood why. His boots hit the pavement with slow, deliberate precision, his face carved from the kind of stone only decades of high-command decisions could shape. The chatter in the terminal died instantly. Someone whispered, That's a 4-star. The officers at the checkpoint shifted uneasily, instinctively stepping into formation, though no order had been given. Miller's throat tightened, his pride suddenly buried beneath the weight of a reality he couldn't comprehend. The general didn't speak to anyone. He didn't have to. He strode past civilians, past TSA supervisors, and stopped directly at the secure corridor where Lena Walsh had disappeared minutes earlier. "Where is she?" Baines swallowed hard, his voice shaky. "Sir, Ms. Walsh was escorted to Holding 4 for further verification." General Devereaux's gaze sharpened like glass. "Verification?" He said the word slowly, deliberately, as though tasting its absurdity. "You're detaining someone with Tier 7 clearance in a public facility?" Silence. Baines glanced sideways at Miller, whose face had turned pale beneath the fluorescent lights. "Sir, Miller began, but Devereaux's voice cut him down mid-sentence, sharp and surgical. "You have no idea who you touched." That was when the second SUV door opened, and another officer approached carrying a slim, steel-encased tablet, passing it silently to the general. Devereaux powered it on with his thumbprint, the secure glass flickering to life, and held it up for Miller to see. "Her file. Lena Walsh." Except it wasn't a file anyone here had ever seen. There was no photo, no home address, no next of kin, just a single header at the top in bold red text. "Active operative, Black Raven Division. Authorization level, Tier 7. Miller stared at the words, his mouth slightly open. I don't. I've never even heard of Black Raven." "You're not supposed to," Devereaux said flatly. "And neither are 99% of the people with security clearances in this country." He handed the tablet back, scanning the room briefly. "Effective immediately," he said, "this checkpoint is shut down. No further scans. No recordings. No leaks." The officers hesitated. Miller swallowed hard, finally forcing the question that had been gnawing at him since Lena's boarding pass first flagged red. "Sir, who is she?" Devereaux turned, his eyes narrowing, the kind of stare that landed heavier than words ever could. "She's the reason you get to sleep at night, Sergeant." Before anyone could respond, the secured hallway doors opened, and Lena Walsh stepped back into view. Her hood was gone now, revealing sharp features framed by dark auburn hair tied into a low knot. She wasn't hiding anymore. If anything, her presence carried a quiet weight that made even the general straighten slightly as she approached. And then it happened. 4 stars saluted her first. The terminal, already hushed, seemed to stop breathing. Miller's hands froze at his sides, his earlier mockery dissolving into something heavier, something cold and hollow at the base of his throat. Lena returned the salute with practiced precision, her gaze unwavering. "No hesitation. No shame. Ma'am," Devereaux said simply, lowering his hand, his voice soft in a way no one there had expected. "We've secured the corridor. The package is ready." Lena nodded once. "Good." She turned slightly, catching Miller's stunned expression. For the briefest moment, something flickered behind her eyes. Not anger, not triumph, but pity. "Sergeant," she said quietly, almost gently, "you don't get paid enough to carry the weight you almost picked up today." And just like that, she moved past him, stepping into the secured lane that travelers would never see, escorted by 2 agents in silent formation. But Miller couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't let go of the gnawing need to understand why. The general lingered for a moment, adjusting his jacket before turning back toward the security team. "For the record," he said, his tone low but sharp, "this entire exchange never happened. As far as you're concerned, Lena Walsh was never here." He started to leave, but Miller, foolishly, stubbornly, called after him. "Sir, what does Tier 7 even mean?" Devereaux stopped mid-step, pivoting just enough for his voice to carry back across the terminal. "It means," he said evenly, "she answers to fewer people in this country than I do." And then he was gone. The silence after his exit was suffocating. Baines rubbed a hand over his jaw, muttering, "What the hell was that?" One of the younger officers, pale and wide-eyed, whispered back, "That wasn't TSA. That wasn't CIA. That was something else." But Miller already knew. Somewhere deep in his gut, he knew. Whatever Lena Walsh was involved in wasn't just above his pay grade, it was above everything. And yet he also knew something else, something he didn't want to admit, not even to himself. This wasn't over. Because the call hadn't come from the Pentagon. The override authorization had come from somewhere higher. Somewhere no badge, no clearance, no title could explain. And if Lena Walsh was tied to that, then the world was about to change. The security checkpoint reopened an hour later, but the air inside Terminal C was different now. Heavier, quieter. Travelers still whispered about the mysterious woman who'd been detained, then escorted through reinforced doors no one even knew existed. Sergeant Ethan Miller sat behind a console, staring at the frozen security feed. He couldn't stop replaying it. The sealed envelope, the microchip, the call on the red line, and a four-star general saluting her first. Nothing made sense. Across the city, Lena Walsh stood in a small, windowless briefing room. The black envelope sat between her and General Marcus Devereaux. Without a word, she slid it forward. The general broke the seal and pulled out the steel panel, pressing it against a biometric reader. A holographic map ignited across the table, scattering encrypted coordinates in glowing white. "Three breaches," Devereaux said quietly, his jaw tight. "Ankara, Kiev, and," he paused, his gaze locking with hers, "here." Lena nodded. "That's why I'm leaving." Devereaux exhaled slowly, leaning back. "You know, most people in this country will never know this exists." "They're not supposed to," Lena replied softly. Back at Reagan, the tension deepened. A plain manila envelope was slid silently beneath the TSA supervisor's door. Inside were three typed words. "Shut it down." No signature. No seal. No explanation. Hours later, at exactly 3:17 a.m., a top-level satellite over the South China Sea went dark. Not offline, erased. Systems that weren't supposed to fail had disappeared without leaving a trace. 60 seconds later, an override key logged into the defense network under one name only. Walsh, L. Engaged. By 4 a.m., Lena was gone. No boarding pass. No manifest. No trace in any public system. Just silence. 6 weeks later, Sergeant Miller returned home after a late shift to find a small, unmarked package waiting at his door. Inside was a single silver pen, 2 wings, a sword through the center. The same insignia he'd seen on her envelope. Beneath it, a folded slip of paper, handwritten in clean, deliberate strokes. Sometimes respect isn't earned in public. Sometimes it's carried in silence. No name. No instructions. Nothing else. Miller stared at the pen for a long moment, his fingers tracing the edges before gently closing the box. He still didn't understand who Lena Walsh was, or why she triggered a call that moved generals and shut down systems above his clearance level. But one thing was certain: people like her don't exist until the world needs them most.